Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
In our neighborhood in the town of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, trick-or-treating was initially scheduled for October 27th. Inclement weather called for a reschedule, so it ended up being on Halloween night, which, as you know, was a Thursday this year. Weather again caused a cancellation, but finally, the night after Halloween, trick-or-treating was held. It was a fun evening. Kids came out in droves. There were kids in scary costumes like witches, vampires, and creepy clowns, while others had on any number of pop culture-influenced costumes, my favorite of which was a shockingly accurate Endgame-style Iron Man Mark 85 suit. It was from 4 until 7 p.m., which was perfect, because at about 6:50, we gave the last piece of Halloween candy in our home out to an adorable little Mulan. Now, around here, a few stragglers are to be expected. Kids whose parents weren't available during the official time. Kids who, for whatever reason, couldn't make it. Whatever the case may be, it's not unusual to get your doorbell rang a few times over the next day or two. On Saturday, though, starting at about 4:10 p.m., our doorbell was ringing just as much as it was the night before. For the first few kids, we were forced to turn them away because we didn't have any candy. My wife went to the store and picked some up, and we went through another round of trick-or-treating. We assumed that people might have gotten their dates mixed up, with the reschedule throwing things off. We assumed that was the end of it. Then Sunday came. We started noticing that the kids were coming to our door, and they were the same ones as the previous nights, sometimes in the same groups, other times solo or with different companions. When the Mark 85 suit kid came through for the third time, I looked around, and at that moment I realized that there were substantially more children on the street than guardians. Generally speaking, there are 3 to 4 kids for every supervising adult. Now there were at least 8 to 10 kids for every adult. I kept an eye on the window, waiting for another adult to come by. When one finally did, I stepped outside before the kids got to the doorstop. I recognized the man as Mike, a guy who lived 3 blocks over, and I only recognized him because I'd spoken to him before about the seemingly rotating door of classic cars he had parked in his driveway. His hair was unkempt, his skin pale. His clothes were disheveled, and he had what I can only assume was a small sliver of dried blood under his nose. "Hey, man, you all right?" I asked him. Mike seemed to quickly look behind me, then very subtly nodded his head before turning away. I looked behind me and found a Spider-Man, an Elsa, and 2 pirates staring up at me. "You kids, you can go up to the door. We have candy for you." The kids didn't move. I looked back towards Mike, who quickly glanced at the kids, then just as subtly shook his head from side to side. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew something wasn't right. I turned back to the kids. "You guys want some candy?" I said in my most chipper tone while walking back to the door. "Your costumes are great." I quickly got inside, shoved candy into the kids' various receptacles, and closed and locked the door. "What's wrong?" Kimmy asked me, reading the very obvious look on my face. "I don't know. You know Mike from 109th? Something's going on." "Did he say why all the kids are out again?" "No, he didn't say anything at all. He looked terrified. Those weird-ass little kids were..." The conversation was cut short by our doorbell ringing again. I supplied a Captain America and a non-licensed Ghost with a fun-sized Snickers and a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup each and sent them on the way. You should call the library, where we live. The library doubles as City Hall. And see what's going on, I said to Kimmy. It's Saturday. It won't be open until Monday. Jeez, that's right. I looked out the window. To both sides there were kids walking, some toward the house, others away. The rest of the night went without incident, and we hoped against hope that that was the end of it. Then at 4:07 p.m. yesterday, the doorbell rang. You gotta be kidding me, I said as I got up from the couch. Kimmy stayed seated. Do those little assholes think we work at Hershey's? I opened the front door and found Ray from the new Star Wars trilogy, Aladdin, and who I'm pretty sure was the same ghost as the aforementioned incident, standing there with their bags held out in front of them, none of whom had the decency to say, trick or treat. Look, kids, you look great, but we're out of candy. You guys cleaned us all out. I kept the annoyance out of the tone of voice and spoke in the typical talking to a kid tone of voice. The kids just stood there with their bags held out, not saying a word. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there in silence as well. It felt like an eternity before any of them moved, with the Aladdin finally breaking the tense standoff, shaking slightly his bag, as if he were annoyed I hadn't put anything in it yet. Dude, I just told you we don't have any candy. Why are you even trick-or-treating still? If you can't tell, I'm not the best with kids. They just kept standing there, staring at me. I'm going to close my door now. Go get candy from the next house, I said, as I shut my door. I turned to walk back to the couch when a loud thud shook the picture frames we had near our front door. Another thud sent one of them sliding to the ground, shattering. I stomped back to the door and flung it open. Are you kidding me? In the closet, next to the front door, we had some leftover candy. I just hadn't anticipated needing to use it to fend off an attack. I took a handful, pushed the screen door farther open than the kids had it, and threw the candy out onto the front yard. Go get it, you little scavengers, and stay away from our house. I slammed the door and turned back towards Kimmy, who had already been calling the police. Enough was enough. It was strange enough that all these kids were still out trick-or-treating, but now they were starting to damage the property of people who wouldn't comply. Hi, we live over on Congress, and there's kids. Yeah. Okay, so what? Okay, I get that, but what are you doing about it? Well, now the kids are... Hello? Hello? She shook the phone from her ear. What the hell? What did they say? That they've got a bunch of calls about it and are looking into it. Then she hung up. Jesus. Well, we really are almost out of candy. If it's between buying another bag of candy until this is taken care of and having these little bastards mess up our house, I'm gonna go get some. Will you wait until 7? Kimmy asked. I then realized that the kids were only trick-or-treating between the officially sanctioned hours, if not the officially sanctioned days. Yeah, of course. Why? Well, wait, why don't you just come with me? Well, what if today is the day they don't stop at 7? I know Walgreens is only like 2 minutes away, but I don't want to come home and find all of our windows smashed. I'll give them candy if I absolutely have to. Should we just leave a bowl on the porch, I suggested? What if a kid comes by and just empties it into his bag? A fair point. 7 p.m. rolled around, and a few minutes after that I was pulling out of our driveway. As I drove, I noticed kids still walking around, but assumed they were heading home for the night, and prayed that Kimmy hadn't been right about that night being the night they ignored the set times. I went to Walgreens and picked up a few more bags of candy. On the way back, I decided to swing by Mike's house on 109th, and on the off chance he was outside, I planned to ask him what the hell was going on. I turned onto 109th, and the first thing I noticed was the house that had arguably had the best Halloween decorations in the neighborhood. 2 large infallible ghouls now sat deflated on their front lawn, with the rest of their decorations similarly messily strewn about. As I neared Mike's house, I noticed 2 houses with their doors open, one of which had similarly disheveled lawn, in addition to a broken front window. Mike's house finally came into view, and I noticed the broken windows on his 1967 Cutlass. I pulled up and quickly got out of my car. I walked around the Cutlass and nearly tripped over something in the driveway. That something was Mike's body, whose skull had been caved in. I immediately returned to my car and floored it to my home, passing, retreating trick-or-treaters who all stood in place and turned their heads to watch as I sped by them. I made my way to 106th and noticed on our block, too, that 3 houses had been similarly vandalized, all of them with their doors left wide open. As I drove, I called 911. 911, what's your location? The operator answered. There's a body on 109th. I was driving on 109th by Congress, and there was a body in my driveway. I just barely managed to get out. Yes, sir, we've gotten calls about that in recent hours. We have a unit on the way. I was bewildered. What do you mean, in the recent hours? You've known about this for hours and nobody's here yet? The operator didn't respond right away. Hello? I yelled into my phone. Sir, the operator whispered. Just get to your house and lock your doors. We're working on it. What's going on? Sir, please, just get to your house and lock your doors. Go in your basement. Use the time you have before they come back tomorrow. Please, I'm sorry. The call ended at the same time I pulled into our garage. I hurried inside, locking every door behind me as I did. Kimmy! I yelled out. She rushed into the kitchen to meet me and wrapped her arms around me, sobbing on my shoulder. What happened? I asked, inspecting her for any sign of injury. Kevin and Carol, she said between sobs. Kevin and Carol were our neighbors across the street, a kind couple that had a big party every year to which the entire neighborhood was encouraged to attend. I ran into our living room and looked out the window. I'd been so focused on getting home to make sure my wife was okay that I hadn't noticed what was going on just across the street. Carol laid halfway in and halfway out of their front door, her face on the pavement. Kevin, a large man, was slumped against a large tree in their front yard with, from what I could tell from across the street, a pitchfork decoration with a handle shoved down his throat and into his stomach. Jesus Christ! Was it the kids? I asked, maybe somewhat rhetorically. Kimmy nodded in the affirmative. Mike, too, he's dead in his driveway. What's happening? My wife was doing her best to maintain composure, and I wasn't far behind her. We need to leave, I said. Grab some things. We'll go to your parents. Kimmy normally takes an absurdly long time to get ready for something, but it didn't take her longer than 30 seconds for us to get out to the garage. We got in the car, turned it on, and pressed the garage door opener. As the door opened, so too came into view 3 children, the princess, the Flash, and a firefighter, who ducked under the door before it had fully opened. 2 of the kids brandished knives and punctured the back tires of our car, then made their way over to our other vehicle and did the same. Then, as if it were a completely normal thing to do, they put the knives away and held up their candy bags. What the hell? Kimmy cried, and I was in too much shock to move. I finally snapped out of it and opened my door slowly. Candy? You want candy? I said. The kids just stood there with their bags held open. Kimmy, come on. Kids, you want to go around to the front? I'll meet you there with some candy. I talked as I slowly walked around the car and took Kimmy in my arms, but the kids didn't want to meet us around front. They followed as I opened our door. We walked backward into our breezeway, the kids following closely with the bags held out. They followed us through our kitchen and into the living room, where I put 2 pieces of candy into each of their bags. After I'd done so, the kids closed their bags, at which point I opened our front door, and the children went on their way. Kimmy and I breathed a sigh of relief, a small victory that was quickly overshadowed by the realization of a greater loss, our means of escape. With a gauntlet of murderous children between us and freedom, we tried to think of alternatives. Anyone who lived nearby wasn't answering their phone, so Kimmy thought of what might serve as something of an alternative to escape. I bought a deadbolt for our front door a few months ago, but never installed it. My wife suggested we use it on the basement door. It took some time and I had to provide some more kids with candy, but I got it done. By the time I was finished, it was late. Our porch light was on, and as I was grabbing the last of the supplies that we intended to take to the basement, a shadow danced on our living room wall. Knock, knock, knock. I opened the door and found a kid that was maybe 9 years old by himself. He didn't seem to be wearing a proper costume, but rather he was in dirty clothes that had been sprayed with blood. The look in his eyes can only be described as void of any life. He had a 1,000-yard stare, and his eyelids hung heavy. The boy held out a pillowcase that was about 1/4 full of candy. I reached into the bowl next to the door, keeping my eyes on him as I did. I dropped a mini Kit Kat and a Reese's peanut butter cup in the pillowcase and waited for him to turn around and walk away. But he didn't. He just continued standing there with his arms in the pillowcase held out. I reached back into the bowl of candy and gave him 2 more pieces. Again, he didn't budge an inch. I gotta make sure there's enough for other kids, I tried to explain in a shaky voice. It wouldn't be fair to them if I gave all the candy to you. The kid finally moved, taking a step back, and kept a close eye on him as he walked backward across our yard. Just as he reached the curb, I heard a scream from nearby. 2 houses down, I saw a woman taken down by children in the middle of the street. The boy I'd just given candy to whipped his head around, then pulled a hammer from his back of his waistband and sprinted towards the woman where he joined the group of kids in beating her to death. I yelled for Kimmy to get downstairs as I went around and made sure all the doors and windows, for whatever that was worth, around the house were locked. Kimmy had called 911 several times, but each time got dismissive answers, and it's gotten to the point now that 911 isn't even answering anymore. We've been in the basement since about 2 a.m. In that time, our power has been cut, and we've heard numerous windows in our house be shattered, amongst other things. They tried to get into the basement, but so far the deadbolt has held. We're just lucky we have a solid basement door. If you can, please call someone. Call the news in your area. We called ours but got no response. Please help us. If you have any ideas on what could get anyone down here to help us, please do. Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Please.